The painted desert doesn't exactly welcome strangers. It tolerates them, as long as they respect the heat. Dr. Adrian Hale adjusted the brim of his hat, squinting against the glare. Before him lay the vast expanse of the petrified forest, a landscape that looked less like Earth and more like a bruised, alien planet. But Hale wasn't here for the usual sights, the tourist maps of Arizona, marking the giant logs or the crystal forest, held no mystery for him. He was a paleobotanist specializing in acoustic geologia field, so niche, his colleagues called it pseudoscience. Hale believed that the process of turning wood to stone didn't just preserve its shape. He believed the quartz and silica trapped the very vibrations of the era in which the tree died. "You're staring at the ground again, Doctor," a voice called out. Hale looked up. Standing on a ridge of blue clay was Sarah Begay, his Navajo guide. She didn't seem to be suffering from the heat at all. "Just reading the story," Sarah Hale replied, climbing up to join her. 225 million years ago, this was a lush rainforest. Now, dust and silence. Not silence, Sarah corrected, her gaze turning north to a jagged canyon, a restricted area known as the Black Mesa Break. The Dine Elders say, the stone trees have voices. They say the spirits trapped the thunder inside the wood when the great floods came. You call it acoustic geology. We call it memory. Hale smiled, patting the heavy audio equipment in his pack. "Then let's see if we can get them to speak to a microphone." They were heading into the break, a section of the park uncovered by a massive landslide just 3 weeks prior. Satellite images showed massive, glistening logs that hadn't seen the sun since the Triassic period. The hike into the Black Mesa Break was treacherous. The ground was a kaleidoscope of purple, gray, and deep red. As they descended into the new ravine, the temperature seemed to spike, trapped between the canyon walls. And then they saw it. It looked like the aftermath of a Titan's game of pickup sticks. Massive trunks, some 6 feet in diameter, lay strewn across the canyon floor. But unlike the dull, dusty logs in the public areas, these were vibrant. The silica had crystallized into brilliant amethyst, carnelian, and jasper. They glittered violently in the sun. "Incredible," Hale breathed. He approached the nearest log, a perfect preservation of an ancient conifer. The bark texture was so distinct it looked like it could still scrape skin. But it was cold. Hard quartz. Sarah stayed back, her demeanor shifting. She pulled a small pouch of corn pollen from her pocket and scattered it to the 4 winds. "The air is heavy here, Adrian. Different." Hale was already setting up his laser vibrometer and contact microphones. He attached a sensor to the exposed cross-section of the log, where agate rings swirled in reds and oranges. Checking impedance. Alimutared. Putting on his headphones. Usually, Stone gave off a low, static hum. He turned the gain up. At first, there was only the wind. Then, a sharp crack echoed in his headphones, followed by a rhythmic thrumming. It wasn't random noise. It was a pattern. Thump thump. Thump thump. Sarah Hale waved her over, his eyes wide. "You need to hear this." She hesitated, then took the headphones. She listened for a moment, and her face went pale. "It sounds like a heartbeat. It's a rhythmic piezoelectric effect." Hale rationalized, though his voice shook. "The quartz crystals are under pressure from the heat." "No," Sarah handed the headphones back. "That is the heartbeat of the forest before it turned to stone." "I told you." The stone remembers. As the afternoon wore on, they ventured deeper. The logs grew larger, and their arrangement became stranger. They weren't just scattered. They seemed to be aligned. A row of massive, crystallized trunks formed a corridor leading toward a cave opening at the base of the mesa. "This is impossible," Hale said, checking his GPS. "Nature doesn't arrange fossilized trees in parallel lines." "Nature didn't," Sarah whispered. They entered the corridor. The canyon walls here were etched with petroglyphs, but they were unlike any Hale had seen before. They were deeper, older, depicting not humans, but towering figures standing amidst trees that touched the sky. At the end of the corridor lay the cave. Inside, protected from the elements, was a single, massive stump. It wasn't lying down. It was upright, rooted in the stone floor. It was a stump of pure, translucent selenite and clear quartz. Hale approached it with reverence. A mother tree. It died standing up. He placed his hand on the cool surface. He didn't need microphones this time. A vibration hummed through his palm, traveling up his arm, rattling his teeth. A vision, unbidden and overwhelming, flooded Hale's mind. He was no longer in the desert. The air was thick, humid, smelling of ozone and rotting vegetation. Ferns the size of houses swayed in a breeze. Above, dragonflies with 3-foot wingspans buzzed like biological drones. He saw the tree he was touching not as stone, but as a living, towering giant. And then he saw them, shadowy figures, not quite human, moving between the trees. They weren't hunting. They were singing, a low, resonant hum that seemed to accelerate the growth of the plants. They were the gardeners of the Triassic, a lost civilization. The vision shifted. The sky turned fire red. Ash began to fall like snow. The great rivers boiled. A mudslide came, a wall of superheated earth moving at the speed of sound. The figures didn't run. They gathered around the mother tree, placing their hands on its bark, singing louder, pouring their essence, their history, their very souls, into the wood as the silica-rich mud buried them. Hale gasped, pulling his hand back as if burned. He fell backward onto the dusty floor. The silence of the desert rushed back in. Sarah was kneeling beside him, offering a canteen of water. She didn't ask what he saw. Her eyes told him she already knew. They weren't just trees, Hale stammered, his scientific worldview fracturing. The preservation. It wasn't an accident, it was on arc. They stored themselves in the silica. Preservation requires transformation, Sarah said softly. To save the essence, the form must change. Wood rots. Stone endures. They knew the fire was coming. Hale looked at his audio recorder. The display showed a complex waveform, not noise, but a structured, dense data stream. He had hours of recording. If he decoded it, it might contain the biological history of a lost epoch, or perhaps the songs he had heard in his mind. He stood up, looking at the translucent stump. He felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness. If he published this, they would cut this place apart. They would mine the mother tree for samples. They would crush the legends to find the science. What will you do, Doctor? Sarah asked. Hale looked at his equipment, then at the magnificent, silent guardian of crystal. He thought of the whispers, the heartbeat, the desperate song of the ancients. The landslide, Hale said, his voice steady. It's unstable. Another tremor could bury this whole ravine again. Sarah smiled, a genuine, knowing smile. Yes, the earth is very shifting here. It would be dangerous to bring others. They hiked out as the sun began to set, painting the desert in hues of violent violet and burning orange. They carried the recordings, but they left the location unmarked. Back at the trailhead, Hale sat in his Jeep, the USB drive containing the heartbeat on his dashboard. He knew he would spend the rest of his life analyzing those sounds in secret, decoding the language of a pre-human world. He had unearthed a legend, but he realized that some things were not meant for a museum case. He looked out at the horizon, where the silhouettes of the petrified logs lay like fallen soldiers. They were no longer just rocks to him. They were a library, sealed in agate and amethyst, waiting for the right listener. As he started the engine, a gust of wind blew through the canyon. To anyone else, it was just the wind, but to Hale and to Sarah, it sounded exactly like a sigh of relief. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of our next story. See you 10.